So creating art is tough. So especially when you're starting a new project, this is always the hardest part, is you open up this and then all you're looking at is this empty thing. And this is usually the toughest part, is getting something from nothing. And so anything we can do to make this process easier of getting started especially, but also just general workflow and general making things easier, smoother, faster, better, that's going to be good. So this is important because if you have an optimized workflow like this and everything is in its proper place, you know where it all is, and it's fast and easy for you to get started and work on something, that means a few things. One is when you don't have motivation and you just don't feel like doing it, you're still a lot more likely to go and sit down and make something, because if all you have to do is turn on your computer, open up Blender, and then everything is fully set up the way it needs to be, and that's it, and you can just go and make stuff straight away from there, that's going to be, you're going to be in a lot better of a position than if you don't feel like doing it. You sit down, open up Blender, and then you got to like organize the windows, find the models you want, find the textures, look through your hard drive. Like, it's just, all that stuff is just like extra resistance that's getting in the way of you actually making something. The other thing too is that even if you do have motivation, like you sit down and you're really excited to work on something, you have some ideas of something you want to do, like, sometimes you get these very temporary surges of motivation or inspiration to go and create something. And if you just waste that on like organization and moving windows around, that's not good. And trust me, I've done that plenty of times. Like, you sit down to make something, you have this great idea, and then you start looking through like your C hard drive, and then 20 minutes go by, and all of a sudden you're just tired and you don't want to do it anymore, and then you give up. There's one last reason I think it's important to do this, is just not just when you're getting started, but when you're just working on something, the entire process gets smoother. It just gets easier and faster and better. So it means you can get, more work done in the same or less time. So let's talk about what my actual default workflow is. Now, I don't think mine's perfect, but I think mine is pretty good for me and what I do. But, obviously take all this information and you can look at what I do and then take what I'm showing you and apply it to whatever makes the most sense for you and what you're doing. In my default file, I have a few things. Let's talk about the viewport first of all. I'll talk about all the windows and settings in a bit, but let's talk about what's actually in the viewport first of all. So instead of a cube and a light and a camera, I have just this guy right here. The reason I have this guy is just so that I have a quick reference for how big things are. Usually I don't use this guy in the actual render. Like, I almost always end up deleting him or moving him to the side out of the view. But just having a person there is just nice for me to be able to tell how big things are. The other thing I have changed is the camera. So instead of having the camera off at some weird angle pointing down this way, I just have it right here pointing forward. And this is, if you looked at my work, a lot of it has like this similar composition to like this kind of camera angle. So it's just there because it's easy. But the other thing too is having this camera angle is very nice, because it means you'll notice that I have the x-axis lined up this way, so that anytime I add an object in here and I hit GX to move it along the x-axis, that'll always be left and right in the project, versus if you have the camera this way. Let's just rotate it over here. So if I had it facing this way in a different project, say, and now when I move it and I hit GX, it's going to be forward and backwards, whereas GY is now left and right. So this was something that bugged me a lot when I first started out, and it's just, if you always have GX from the camera's view to be left and right, and always GY is forward and backwards, that just makes things much, much quicker and easier to deal with. And also when you press 1 to go into orthographic front view, same thing, that'll be lined up with what your camera's seeing. It's always left and right on the X and Y, or it's always, lined up with the same direction you move things in the camera. And so I don't always use this camera angle exactly, but if it's over here, when I move it around, it'll be more likely to be in that general direction, and then it's just easier to deal with moving stuff around. That's the viewport. Very simple. 2 objects, no lights. I guess one thing I do have for lights is if I go to render view, I do have a sky texture node in the world settings. So instead of an HDRI, I'm just using this. It's just, this just comes with Blender. You just hit Shift A in the world shader editor, and then you just type in sky texture. And then that's it right there. If you don't know what this is, you can just move basically like an HDRI, but no actual background. It's just like a sun and sky, and you can move the sun around like this. So I just have that. So there's some light in here. And then usually if it's a dark scene, I'll just take that out. So there's the settings that I use. You don't have to copy that, but just light coming from the side so I can just kind of clearly see what's going on. So that's the viewport. Let's talk about the windows and how I have this set up. So I've tried a few different window setups, and this is what works best for me. So right now we've got the viewport in the middle. So this main one is going to be always in solid view or wireframe pretty much. And so this is my working viewport while I'm like rotating around, moving objects around. And this is just what I'm using to just, manipulate objects in edit mode and all that. So this is pretty much always not in rendered view. This other viewport, however, is always in rendered view. So right now it's in solid for my default, but when I'm working, this is always in rendered view. And what I do is just hit Control B. This is from just the camera's perspective. Something a lot of people have asked about is this render preview in the bottom left here. What this is all you do is, I'll show you how to set this up. Let's go back to solid here. It's just another viewport. So the way you do it is you just, when you hover over the corner of a window, you can drag it open like this. Sorry, not like that, like this. So if you just open up another viewport, just switch, if it's not already, just switch it to viewport. So you've got two viewports now. And then all you do is, we just want to unhide, or we just want to hide all the overlays in GUI basically. The way we do that is, first of all, click this button right here, the Show Gizmo button. Uncheck this, so this thing disappears. Uncheck overlay, so that means any selections and stuff like that. Uncheck overlays, and that will get rid of all that. So now we can't see any of the selections we've made. Also, if this menu is open here, just press N to hide that menu. N will show and hide this one, so just N to hide that. T will hide the tools over here, so just press T. And then to get rid of this thing at the top, right click in the empty space between any of these icons at the top, and then you'll get this header menu. Just uncheck Show Header, and now we have a perfectly clean viewport window. And then all I do is just put that into rendered view. And then to get it to be a little bit smoother, for me, I have the denoise checkbox on. So without that, you can see it's going to be regular noisy, and then you just denoise it. So I'm running a 3090, so it's very fast and responsive, but if your machine's a bit slower, the denoise button here might not work as well for you. So just play with these settings and figure out what is going to be smoothest and fastest for you. On my old card, it actually didn't work very well to have the denoise enabled in the viewport, but on this card, it works really well. So I just have it on there, and then it's very, very snappy. So yeah, when you set it up this way and you have denoising enabled, and if you have a good GPU, it'll be very, very fast and responsive, and that's just how I like to keep it. Also, I like keeping this viewport small down here. Let's just close this one. I like keeping this one small down here just so it has less pixels to render, which means it'll render a preview faster. It allows you to see everything all at once. You get to look at the bigger picture instead of staying zoomed in on the smaller details and getting caught up in things you don't need to work on. So if you have it small, you'll be more likely to work on the bigger picture all at once versus like getting caught up in small little details that nobody's going to see. So I like keeping it small just so I can see what the overall final picture is going to look like at all times. The other thing to mention is I always have this viewport down here is always rendering from the camera's view. So when you press 0, it'll snap your view here to what the camera sees like this. And then what that means is I at all times, I can see what the final picture is going to look like. That's important because if you're like orbiting around like this and you're not actually looking at it from the perspective that everyone else is going to see it at, you might make decisions that don't match up with, the perspective that everyone else will actually see the picture from in the end. So I think it's important to have it from the camera's perspective. And also, normally when you go to rendered view, you'll have extra space around here and you'll be able to see all that stuff. I like to just hide that so we're not wasting render time on just empty pixels that we're not even going to see. So what I do is just from the camera's perspective, you just hit 0 and then Control B will bring up this box select, and you can just drag on the outside of the camera's view, and that will just snap your view only to what the camera's going to see. Now, anytime you move the camera around or adjust the focal length or anything like that, it'll stay within just what the camera sees. And that's how I do it. So solid or wireframe here, rendered here, and that's it. Now I always like to have the shader editor open as well. I'm using textures a lot. I'm adding new textures. I'm moving them around. So I always like to have this open because it's, I don't like having to tab back to the shading because that takes a second, puts you into material preview. It's, you don't have, I just don't like tabbing into here because then you tab back and then your rendered view is like, takes a second to load sometimes. I like to have it all just in one workspace, and it's very, very snappy and fast. The other thing is the UV editor is very important for me. So anytime I'm using a texture, I like to be able to move that around and scale the texture and just manipulate the UV map anytime I want. So I always have this UV editor open. I don't need it huge because usually I'm not doing like crazy detailed UV work. It's just, cube project and then move it around. But just having that option to be able to quickly move this around, that's very handy. And I keep it small in the corner because, again, it doesn't need to be big. It just needs to be accessible. This, I don't know if this is the best way to do it. I've tried stacking these things, like instead of having one window like this, outliner on the left, and then properties on the, outliner on the right, and then properties on the left. I've tried having it like vertical, so it's like one window is on top and then one window is on the bottom. That can work. Just really what you like. These are all kind of in a long list, so I kind of like having them vertical. But this doesn't really matter. You can kind of do whatever you want with that, as long as it's visible somewhere. And then that's it. So you might be wondering about the asset browser and all that other stuff. So what I do here is I actually kind of use this bottom window here as the asset library, timeline, shader editor, and you can switch between object and world here all at once. And the way you do this is every single window has this drop-down menu. So you can see if I click it up here, this button in the top left of any window is going to bring down that same menu of all the different windows you can choose. And so in this one, it's, that same menu I was just showing you over here is this button right here. So what you can do is, if you notice in this list here, every single one of the windows has one of the letters underlined. And so what you can do is you can just press the key on the keyboard that is that underlined letter. So for the asset browser, for example, A is underlined. So if I just press A on the keyboard, it'll take me to the asset browser. And then again, if I hit that drop down, press S for shader editor, it'll bring me to that shader editor. Same thing for the UV editor. Just click this menu, press U on the keyboard. Same thing for timeline. It's just L for timeline. So that's how I tab back and forth between all these different windows very, very easily. And they all fit nicely into this little space down here. So A, S, U, L, and you can see it's very quick once you get used to it to tab back and forth between these. So that's how I like to do it. The other thing too is that also works with other drop downs. So like in the shader editor, for example, if you tab, like you click the drop down and then tab into world by pressing W, back to object with pressing O. So that's how I tab back and forth between object and world very easily. So I'm usually just switching back and forth between the shader editor and the asset browser. If you don't know how to move these windows around, I'll quickly show you that. But chances are you probably already know how to move them around. But if you don't, you just hover your mouse in the very corner of any of the windows and you can see, if you look at what my mouse actually looks like, if I go to the edge between two windows, you'll get this arrow on the very edge and you can, drag them this way or expand like this. But if you drag it to the very corner of a window, you'll get this crosshair thing. And then that means if I drag it left, right, up or down, I can pull out a new window and then change that window to whatever I want from that section. So if I drag up, for example, from here, I can drag up another window that'll just duplicate the viewport, but I can switch this to whatever. So I can put it to the timeline or the asset browser or the UV editor or whatever I need. And then to join it back, to get rid of it, you just right click between two areas that you want to join together. So you get that double arrow like this, right click, and then just hit join areas. And then you can just choose which one you want to collapse. So I'll just pull that down like that. So you just do that and then organize them however you want. You'll get used to how it works and how things snap together if you just try it. And then just organize it however you want. And then what you actually want to do is go to a new scene first. So you go File, New, General, organize it however you want, and then save that as your default. If you don't know how to save it as your default, I'll just show you really quick. You go to File, Defaults, and then save startup file. And then whatever you have in this blend file, this entire blend file will open by default next time you open Blender. So that's including any textures, models, any objects in the viewport, any settings you have changed, the entire blend file will be open. So that's really nice to just be able to organize it however you want. Okay, let me quickly talk about some of the settings that I have changed in my default file that I don't ever need to worry about anymore, and they're just on by default. So first of all, the first thing is it's set to cycles by default. So I think when you get Blender, the default is Eevee. I pretty much never use Eevee. Once in a while I do, but for 99% of the time I'm using cycles. So that's the default here. Samples, the default number of samples is kind of weird. It's like 4,000, but then the noise threshold is on. I don't like that setup. I just like to keep this off and then have the samples on 128 for default. And that's good for just a quick test render. These samples here, I will probably turn this up for the final render. So I'll probably do like 500-ish for the final render, but I'm not doing the final render at first. I'm doing test renders along the way. So I'll keep it low for the default so I can just quickly render. So that's that. And then light paths, this is what I have, but there's actually presets here. If you click this menu, you can choose whatever you want here. So just pick whatever works best for you. If you don't know what this stuff does, there's, just go on YouTube, type in Blender light paths tutorial, or just copy my settings. It's not really that important. Reflective and refractive caustics are sometimes, but this isn't a video about what these settings do. It's just about how to organize your workflow, so I'm not going to go over that. But basically, just go through here and choose any settings that you find yourself usually changing when you're starting a project. Just keep them on by default, and then you don't have to worry about that when you're trying to actually make something. The other things here are the resolution. This is actually very handy. So 90% of the time or more, I'm making something to post on Instagram and Twitter. So I have it set up so that my aspect ratio is already fit for that. So for me, it's 3000 by 3750. Some people do 4000 by 5000. For me, that's a bit high. I find it's just unnecessarily big, but I like this resolution right here. But do whatever you want. I keep this on 50% again, so I can do quick test renders, and then for the final thing, I will turn this up to 100. But I don't need to do 100% resolution for just a quick test render, just to see how things look. So my default is 50, so I can quickly just boom, come in here, create something, make whatever I want, and then hit render, and it's going to be all the settings for a quick test render, and it's done straight away. So that's 50% resolution at 128 samples, and it took 3 seconds just for a test render. That's really nice. Okay, so that's that, and I don't think there's any other settings here. Oh, there is a couple. So I have the mist pass enabled because, as you'll see later in my workflow, the mist pass is something I use all the time to bring into Photoshop. So the way you do that is you just come to this tab right here, this collection of photos looking icon, go to passes, data, and then just check the button here for mist. I also have the denoising data button checked, and that gives you access to, in the compositing, the denoise node has this, that'll give you the normal and albedo passes from your render layers. But I think you can just use the denoise checkbox right here, and that will do pretty much the same thing, I think, if you just change this to a normal and albedo. I think it does the same thing. I just use the node in here because that's what I've been using for a long time. So it's just, I don't know. I think it's the exact same thing as this checkbox though. So don't worry about that if you don't want to. And then the other thing that I have in my default file is this lens distortion node. So I pretty much use a little bit of lens distortion on every single project because if you were taking a picture with a real camera, you're always going to get a little bit of lens distortion. And it looks kind of cool. So I just have it on very soft. It's on 0.0055 for me. No other settings changed, no distortion. And then, when I hit render, it's all getting denoised, it's getting the lens distortion, and it's all ready to go. And then we get the mist pass, of course, too, and I don't have to worry about enabling that. So again, you just organize it however you want. File, defaults, save startup file, and you'll probably have to do this a few times to get it fully optimized. So you'll find that you'll make a default scene, you'll create a new project and you'll test it out, and then you'll find yourself moving windows around, and you'll just naturally kind of figure it out with a bit of trial and error. That's pretty much it for my default file. I don't think there's anything else in here that I need to worry about. That's it for this one. But The other thing I want to talk about that's very important for optimizing your workflow is how you organize your files in Windows, or if you don't use Windows, your file management for photos. So the way I do mine is any folder of textures, just keep it organized in a way that makes sense for you. Really, I'm not the best at organizing files, but when you download textures, just put them in folders that make sense and are very easy to find, so that when you open up the file browser, you can just quickly navigate to a textures folder, for example, or for me, a photos folder, and then my Unsplash downloads is here. So I have a big folder of all of the all the stock photos that I use sometimes, or if I have my own skies I want to use, or if I have a pack of particles that I made that I want to use, that's all in here, all labeled, all like structured in a way that just makes sense for me. So I can't really tell you the right way to do this for you, but just do this in a way that's going to make sense for your brain, and just a way that seems easy for you to just quickly navigate to the things you need to find. So again, the goal is to just have the ability to quickly, like as fast as possible, find all the tools and files and resources you need to find to put something together as quickly as possible. Now you have your asset browser is organized, all of your files are organized, you have textures in the right spot. By the way, for something I forgot to mention is you can put textures into the asset browser in Blender, so you don't have to worry about doing that in the Windows File Explorer or whatever. I actually haven't really done that because I use Quixel Megascans most of the time for textures, and it's already organized in there automatically. But this is one area that's kind of lacking for me, is organizing textures on my hard drive. But yeah, I'd recommend you do it. And yeah, like I said, like if you have everything laid out in a way that is easy for you to use, as easy as possible for you to use, that just removes that resistance to just making the things you actually want to make, and it just makes the process easier. Imagine this, how much this adds up day after day, month after month, year after year of creating new projects and having things. Imagine the amount of time you save over a long period of time of like not looking for files, not organizing the windows, just having it all ready to go and set up. So if you do this will give you a big advantage over the people who are not doing this. So I highly recommend keeping everything organized so that your workflow is fully optimized. Okay, I think that's it for this one. Yeah, I'll see you in the next one.